Accidental Marriage by Shadina. Chapter 4. The trio marched in the snow again, Roy in the lead. Too bad his apparent temper wasn't melting the snow around them. Ed was having a hard time walking in Roy's footsteps. Damn it, couldn't Roy do anything right? They had flagged down a taxi at HQ, but Roy had told the cab driver to pull over. He paid him, and now they were walking. Honestly, would it have been a crime to take the cab all the way to the destination? They stopped in front of a large wrought iron gate and a stone fence. Ed's gold eyes blinked up at it, while Roy moved to undo the large padlock on it and open them up. Both Edward and Alphonse were very curious as to what type of place Colonel Bastard lived in. Well, Al didn't quite think along those lines, but close enough. They walked further into the closed plot of land. It was hard to figure out what was in it, with all the snow covering everything. Ed wrapped his arms closely around his body, trying to fend off the cold, as he looked around trying to take everything in. Snow, snow, and more snow! Well, wasn't this lovely? Roy didn't seem very affected by the walk or the cold weather. He just kept going, obviously knowing where he was going. Ed began to wonder if the colonel was taking him somewhere so that he could kill Ed without anyone knowing it, so he could go on in his happy unmarried life. Ed began to then wonder if he should beat him to it. After all, this was the colonel's fault. He didn't do anything to deserve this. They walked around the bend, and sure enough, there was a structure, a rather large structure. Both Al and Ed stopped and stared at it. You didn't even notice it as you're walking to it, since the trees were obscuring it. It was a mansion, a 4-story one. How the hell the colonel could afford a place like this was left for anyone's guess. It was rather amazing, though, the structure, that is. Perhaps the nicest he'd seen. How it was tucked in the trees gave it an even grander aura, like a treasure or secret cave one accidentally stumbled across. The columns, once white, were slightly discolored from the weather, their base curved elegantly against the triangular roof of the porch. The roof was flat and had gathered a substantial amount of snow. On each edge of the roof was a finely crafted ornament, however, because of how high it was, neither Ed nor Al could make out what it was. Under each window was a small ledge that was only wide enough for a small pot of flowers. Of course, right now it was holding a layer of snow. The two boys were busy gawking at the house and missed the colonel walking up the flight of stairs to the front door. He left crisp footprints as evidence of his ascent. He turned around to the boys and gave them an annoyed look. "Are you two coming, or do you plan to freeze?" Both Elric and Hart quickly made their way up the stairs and into the warm house. Roy was already taking off his boots when they stepped in. Ed shivered the cold off, while Al looked at Ed concerned. He was going to say something, but Roy spoke, successfully cutting him off. "You two can take whatever room you want," he said, moving to go up the stairs. Al and Ed shared a mischievous look, and he gave his support if given free rein of such a large place, and made quick work of exploring their new surroundings. The bottom half of the building didn't have any bedrooms, but several different rooms dedicated to different studies. A living room, kitchen, den, library, and even what appeared to be a music room with a large grand piano and several exotic instruments in it. Al especially liked the large drum in the corner. And investigated the next floor up. It had mostly rooms in it, most of which hadn't been used in a long time by the looks of it. The library also took up much of this floor as well. He ended up finding his room on this floor. It was different from the other rooms. It felt more homey. There was a blue patch quilt on the bed that seemed slightly worn with use. A desk and dresser in the corner had several scratches and, oddly enough, scorch marks. Well, this was the Flame Alchemist's home, so perhaps it's not so odd. There was a bookshelf, too, with several books in it, though by the looks of things, they weren't all that advanced in alchemy. There were also other books, like a language book and a math book. The bed was smaller than in the other rooms, yes, but that didn't bother Edward. It just added to things. The curtains on the window were blue and matched the quilt, but down at the bottom it had evidence of a fire. There were a few stains on the rug, too. It was different from the other spotless but dusty rooms. Not to say that this one wasn't dusty, because it was. It was just looked like someone at one point of time actually lived in it, unlike the others. All the rooms were nice enough, like something you'd see in a hotel. Al took the room across from Ib's. Not that he planned on spending much time in it. After all, he didn't actually sleep. The library was probably going to be his primary place to reside in. The library was really very nice, with such an amazing variety of books. Not all were alchemy, but there was a very large section that was. Some books were so old that you were afraid to touch them, lest the pages crumple under your fingertips. It was all very exciting for Al, so much knowledge stored in this one room just waiting for him. It was very exciting indeed, and Al couldn't wait to get started. It was strange to have others in his house, and kind of made Roy nervous when he heard their footprints. He'd never allowed anyone to know where he lived for several reasons, which he'd prefer to keep to himself. Every time there was a creak, Roy would look around trying to figure out where it came from, then remembered about the Elrics. He sighed. It made it especially bad with them running around the way they are. He frowned and opened up his icebox. In there was some chicken, enough to feed him for several days. He wondered if it would be enough for one meal with his new wife. Yep, wife. It made him feel better. Husband was just plain weird. At least wife sounded better, and there was no way in hell he was going to be the wife, so the job was left to Edward. Besides, he could look the part with very little effort. The aroma that filled the air called to the short blonde. He could smell food, even a floor up in a dust-filled room. Like a carrot on a string dangling in front of a horse, he nearly floated downstairs. He didn't know where Al was, but at the moment his thought process existed in his stomach, thus he didn't care. When he arrived to the source of the tantalizing smell, he stopped. What are you making?" he asked. Roy was standing in front of a stove, the fire on high, with a pan in one hand. Crackling noise emanated from it as Roy mixed the contents around, and then it settled into a sizzling noise. "Just a simple stir-fry," he said as he moved the contents again. He didn't have the look to know that his floor would need mopping. He scraped the contents into 2 plates and added some rice before handing a plate to Edward. "Your brother, where is he?" asked, looking around for the clanking armor. Ed placed the plate on the counter and looked around for some silverware. Roy, afraid Ed would start using his hands, supplied it with something. "I don't know. Maybe he got lost." He shuffled some into his mouth, then spoke again. "Maybe he got lost in your friggin' huge mansion," he said around the food. Roy frowned at this display that was lacking in manners. "I realize that you are new to this house, but I can assure you that there is a dining table eager to be used," he said as he himself went to the room with a large table. Everything here was so ritzy and expensive. How was it that Roy could live in a place like this? Did colonels really get paid that much? Ed didn't think so. He sat down at the table that was built for far more than 2 people. He looked over at Roy, who had already started eating. "How can you afford such a place?" he asked with an almost suspicious tone in his voice. Roy was about to take a bite of his chicken, but lowered his fork and looked at Edward, slightly amused. "I can't," he said simply, then took the bite that had been hovering between his mouth and plate. Edward looked very confused for a moment, and Roy had to relieve him before he blew a fuse. He put his fork down and propped his elbows on the table, resting his chin on his laced fingers. "It's a family home, Fullmetal. When my parents died, it was given to me, just as it had happened with them. Each generation adds something to the home for later generations," he said, and watched as understanding lit behind Ed's gold eyes. "So, no, I can't afford this home. In fact, just dealing with the upkeep exceeds my income." "Ah, so Roy was a rich boy. No wonder he's such a bastard. Thinks he's God's gift to the world." Not that Ed believed in God, but it was what the analogy portrayed. He finished his meal and went to take his plate to the kitchen. Roy followed him. "So, I was thinking, Long Beach is rather nice this time of year." Ed looked at him confused. "Long Beach?" he repeated. Roy nodded his head. "Yes, Long Beach. It's just before tourist season, so there shouldn't be too many people there." "Just what the hell are you talking about? Why do I care about Long Beach?" he demanded. Roy laughed. "I'm talking about our honeymoon, Fullmetal," he said. This was going to be very amusing. He wondered just how Fullmetal would react to this, perhaps the same way as he does if you imply him being less than average height. Roy moved from his chair over to the other side and cupped Ed's cheek, forcing him to look up. He looked down at him with half-lidded eyes. What the hell? Roy wasn't seriously considering going on a honeymoon, was he? For the love of all things alchemized, he was not gay, nor was Roy. He had dated nearly every woman in East and Central. There was no possible way that he was... Wait a minute. This was a game. Colonel Bastard was just throwing him off, hoping to get a reaction, just like he does with those damn short jokes. And he wasn't short. Well, he wasn't going to allow that bastard to use this against him. Two could play this game. Roy had found the shocked look rather humorous, but he hadn't been expecting a look of excitement. And what was that? Anticipation. And leaned towards Roy, pushing his cheek against Roy's hand. "Really? I was worried you weren't going to consider it, he said, though in the back of his head he was gagging. I was afraid you were just going to view me as a kid. Roy was taken aback. What the? Oh, he's been caught. Or at least Ed thinks he's got him. Roy wasn't about to be run up. He pulled Edward up and closer to him. He could feel the resistance and smirked. We're married, are we not? Ed was beginning to question himself, but stuck with it. Roy was as straight as a guy could get, and he knew that. Of course he was straight, too. He looked up at Roy, much to his dismay, and smiled. We are, and I'm looking forward to seeing what all this married life entails. Ed could feel a part of himself screaming in agony as it withered away. He leaned forward, too far into this game to stop now, tilting his head up. This had gone way too far for Roy, and obviously had no idea what it was he was implying. Stupid kid, he pushed Edward back. You're just a child, Full Metal. He snapped, then stalked up to his room. You could hear his heavy footprints as he ascended the stairs, and snickered to himself. He had won. He had beaten that smug bastard. Roy was not happy. Stupid brat, he had no idea what he was saying. All that marriage life entails, please, I'll show him what marriage life entails, he said, irritated, as he picked up the phone to make arrangements for their honeymoon.